right, good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am Nick Chase, and I am here to tell you this morning about Kubernetes. We are going to be giving you an introduction to Kubernetes, specifically an introduction to YAML, which is the sort of language that is used to do a lot of the configuration within Kubernetes. So let's kind of get started with the webinar. Who am I? I am Nick Chase. I have been a software developer in the past. I have written a bunch of books. I've done a bunch of stuff, but the main thing is, in this case, I understand YAML. I'm going to teach it to you. So, who is this webinar for? You don't need to be an expert in Kubernetes. You should have a basic understanding of how Kubernetes works. Not a huge requirement at the moment. If you're just getting started, that's fine. We are going to ultimately in this series talk a little bit about different Kubernetes objects and how they fit together, but it's not a Kubernetes tutorial. All right, so let's kind of look at our agenda. We are going to start out, we'll look at different use cases for YAML, some places where it's used. Then we'll look at the overall YAML structure and the different data types within YAML. So even though it's just a straight text thing, there are different data types that you can use. And then if we have enough time, we'll talk about some of the tools. If we don't have enough time, we'll get that information to you anyway. All right, so let's look at some of the uses for YAML. And if you have any questions, please just go ahead and put them into the question pane. I will keep half an eye on it. Uses for YAML. YAML is basically a text file format that's used for various different things. Specifically, you can use it to configure your Kubernetes objects, your Swarm systems, all the different services in Swarm. It's used in OpenStack to create heap templates. Ansible and Maven also use it. Let's kind of look at some examples of that. So, for example, here in Kubernetes, there's a Kubernetes example where we're defining a pod and we're giving it metadata and different values for metadata. And then we're giving it a specification with different containers, and those containers have properties and so on and so forth. We can see in Swarm, we can define different services. So we're saying, okay, these are the services we want, and so on. OpenStack does the same thing. We've got a heap template. We can set parameters on that heap template. We can define resources within the OpenStack heap template. Ansible, again, same thing. We're defining the tasks that Ansible takes. Actions, failures, and so on and so forth. Same thing for Maven. Maven is much simpler than the others. We're not seeing any nesting, but that's okay. So what are we seeing in common with all of these? Okay, what is it that makes these documents YAML documents? Well, there's no specific vocabulary. You can see that they're all different. They all use different things. So the main thing that makes it a YAML document is the formatting. It's a text document. It has very specific formatting, and it's very predictable formatting. Those are the keys that make a YAML document a YAML document. So that's the basic idea. Somebody wants to know, will the presentation be available after the webinar? Yes, all of this will be recorded, and I think almost instantly after this, you'll be able to review it. So you don't have to take notes or anything, and I promise there's no test at the end. Okay, so Let's take a look at the overall YAML structure. So let's start with a very simple YAML document. These are associative arrays, basically name value pair. So name is the name, nginx is the value. Here, image is the name, nginx colon 1.10 is the value. This is a very, very simple YAML document consisting of two associative arrays. Now, this here is also a YAML document, believe it or not. You see, YAML is what's called a superset of JSON. So basically, it's all of JSON plus the more simple YAML format that we've been talking about here. So what we have is the JSON version. So if you want to think of it that way, so if you're familiar with JSON, you can kind of do this comparison in your head. Does anybody have any questions on that so far? Just the kind of basics. All right. So going a little bit more complicated, now we're going to have nested values. So here we have four main values: the API version, the kind, the metadata, and the spec. But metadata and spec each have their own properties. So kind, the value is pod. Metadata, the value is this associative array, name equals pod example. For spec, the value of spec is these, all of these arrays, this group of arrays. Now, notice the indenting. The indenting is what makes this a YAML document. Notice also, they are the same. This is indented 2. All of these are indented 2. It doesn't matter how many spaces you use, as long as you are consistent. You must use the same amount all the time, and you may not skip a step. Okay, so you can't have like 2 here and then 4 somewhere else. Okay, so you must be consistent and never, ever, 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 ever use tabs. Okay, must be spaces. Everybody clear on that? I'm gonna, if nobody says anything, I'm gonna assume that everything is clear. Okay, so moving right along. Sequences. Sometimes what you have is a group of individual values. So for example, in this case, we have a name and then a group of values, or a sequence, sort of like a list. And it's this dash that indicates each one. Okay, you can indent the dash. You don't have to indent the dash, as you can see here. All right. You can also do multiple objects in a document. So these are self-contained. So in this case, we have metadata, pod example, etc. By the way, these are not valid Kubernetes objects because we left out the kind, but that's beside the point. So if anybody gets confused by that, yes, you're right, it's wrong. The important thing here is this is an object, this is an object. We're separating them with this 3 dash construction. Okay. Questions from anyone on all of this so far? All right. Next, you can use comments in YAML just like in anything else. So they would be prefaced by a pound sign and then a space. Notice that you have no space here after the colon, and you always have a space. I'm sorry, no space before the colon, always a space after the colon. again, it has to be predictable in order for the YAML parser to understand it. Okay, so we have a comment here, and then we have a value. Here we're going down multiple levels. That's okay. We can go down as many levels as you want. And then we have another comment. Now, I want you to note here, we have multiple values here that are part of this individual item in the sequence. So let's kind of take that one step at a time. So we have one or more containers. Okay, this is an instance of the container as we set off with the dash. That container has multiple values. Okay, name, image, command, arguments, and so on. The command has its own value. Okay, so you can do as many of these levels as you want. You just have to be kind of careful about how you construct it. Okay. What is the use of template? That is kind of a Kubernetes question. So in a Kubernetes construction, somebody asked, what is the use of template? In a Kubernetes construction, and I'll just kind of talk about it really quickly. This definition is being used to create the object. Is used to create the object on the actual Kubernetes server. So the template defines what's going to happen for one or more objects. That's why they call it a template. But that's more of a Kubernetes question than a YAML question. As far as YAML is concerned, that's just a name. There's nothing magical about it. Is there an indentation rule for the comments? So the indentation rule for the comments is that they must follow the same rule as everything else. So, for example, here you notice that the unique key for the daemon set instance is indented the same amount as the name. So this container is run once on each node in the cluster is indented the same as the container object. So you just have to be careful to make sure that you indent them the same amount as what you are commenting. How would you add a block level comment in a YAML document? So I think what you're probably asking there is how can you comment out a bunch of YAML? And what I would say in that case is, in this format, there is no way to do that. However, remember that this is also a subset of JavaScript, or JSON rather. Let me rephrase. This is also a superset of JSON. So you may be able to do it with a JSON construction, although I haven't tried it. If we have time at the end, maybe we'll try it. This webinar is usually given in the course of an hour, and we're doing it in half an hour. So we're kind of moving a little bit faster than normal. So let's move on. If we have time at the end, we'll try it out. If not, I'll show you how we can kind of try things out. Going back to where we are, data types. So YAML has multiple built-in data types. You can see here, strings, maps or dictionaries, which would be those associative arrays we talked about, integers, floats, booleans, base 64 and binary data, sets and lists, which would be those sequences that we talked about, timestamps, and hex. So let's see an example of some of those. In order to mess with it, and this is what I was saying a minute ago, you can create a program that reads your YAML files and kind of spits out back to you what you see. So the first thing that you would want to do would be to install a YAML parser, which for Python is very easy. You just use PyYAML. And I'll show you where you can find like an implementation for like every program language in the world. This is a simple program. We import the parser, we open the file, and then we're just going to load all of the objects in the file and then loop through them and print out what they are. So for example, if I take this set of data, so I've got, let's just drop this in a notepad file, which you're not seeing right now. So let me just share my whole screen. One moment. Here we go. So if I take this data and let's just kind of make it bigger so you can see it. So I've got, this is just regular YAML data, okay? And I've also got a program. I already took that program that I showed you a minute ago, and I already have it in here called read YAML. So if I now read this data, it's going to tell me, okay, the first item is called, this is a list, the type is list, and it's got two values, 1 and 2, and so on. I've got a string, value is 1, integer, float, and so on. So that program will read through this data. So if you're doing this on your own, you want to try out something like, can I kill something with comments? You can try that out. I'm just going to forgive the window for a moment. I'm checking for questions. No. Okay. So let's come back to our page here, and let's see what else we can look at. So those were very simple types. What about some more complex types? Let's try some of these. Let's grab these. We'll put them in our file here. So I've got some hex, octal, dates, booleans. Let's take a look at the booleans. Let's see what the program tells us about these, and then we'll talk about them. So same program, it's going to read the file. And let's see what it tells us. Whoops, it helps if you save this. There we go. Let's clear the screen. All right, so let's see what we got here. So hex value. All right, we're used to seeing a hex value, this 0x. You may have seen that when you were doing some HTML stuff or anything like that. There's a hex value, base 16. Okay, so that's why we got 4824, and yet we come out with 18468. So our program translates it into an integer value that. Now let's look here at octal. This one is very important to keep an eye on. Octal values start with 0, and they're base 8. So the same way that this is base 16, this is base 8. So first digit 0 through 7. Next digit is 8. So if we look here, 010 translates to 8. Now, the reason I bring this up is adding leading zeros to things is something that you might do in your data. When you do that, your YAML parser will think that you are trying to do something in base 8. So you want to be careful about that. Now, it recognized the date. There you go. Now let's look at Booleans. Okay, Booleans we know is true or false, but we can also look at them in different ways. So for example, here I've got Boolean off, it's set it to false. Boolean true, it's set it to true. Boolean yes, it's set it to true. Now, note, yes, no is going to depend on the version of YAML. So you want to make sure that you know what's going on. Also, for your values, you can cue that it's a string by putting it in quotes. Yes, this is a number, but we put it in quotes, and therefore it came out as a string. Okay. No questions. All right, we'll come back to here. Let's go on to our next thing. We can also do binary values. Now, the important thing here to look at is the fact that we are forcing a particular data type. Okay, so for example, this would normally come up as an integer, and this would normally come up as a string. But we're saying, no, I want this to be an integer, I want this to be a float, and instead of being just a block of text here, I want this to be binary. Okay, so let's see what our program does with those. Let's make sure that we save the file too. Save. Okay. All right. So if we look at this, so we did succeed in getting this to be binary, and we succeeded in getting this to be a float. It added the 0.0, and we got this to be an integer. So if you ever need to force a data type, you can do that. Okay, now, right. Now, another thing to deal with is how to handle text. So there are two different ways to handle blocks of text in YAML. All right. Now, what you notice here is we have two different indicators. We have the greater than sign, and we have the pipe. Now, this is going to determine how YAML treats this text. Okay, so let's take a look at what we see. Save the file. I'll remember one of these days. All right. All right, so now if we take a look here, first of all, just a quick note that the file was read in as an object, and then the parser put it out in whatever order it wanted. It wasn't necessarily the order in which it was read. But you notice this first item here. Let's see if I can mark this. Here we go. So the first item here, example, which we marked with the greater than sign, went in like HTML. Okay, it just kind of, there was no, any line breaks were taken out, etc. Whereas the second example, which we put in with a pipe, that's going to be weird. Let's do it this way. Which we put in with a pipe, all of the line breaks were preserved. So you can do that however, you have the control to do whatever you need with that. Okay, does anybody have any questions? All right. We use 3 dashes to define multiple objects in YAML. I was not clear on the purpose of using a single hyphen in YAML. You had it in your YAML example when showing how to add comments. Okay, so the purpose of the single dash is that, let me see if I can find one here in my examples. Yes. So single dash is when we want to create a list. Okay. So, for example, this is designating multiple documents or objects, but this is multiple parameters for this this name. So this is a name value construction, and the value is a list of these two items. All right. Since there's no questions, let me show you some of the tools really quick. We've got just a couple minutes left. So there are millions, it feels like millions, but there are tons of libraries that you can use to work with YAML. For example, YAML.org has frameworks and libraries, and so you can see here whatever language you want to work with, you have the ability to do that. Like I said, I use PyYAML because I'm using Python. It's easy, but there's all kinds of there are more YAML tools than there are languages that I personally have ever heard of. So that should get you going. In fact, because Kubernetes is run by YAML, any language that handles YAML can run Kubernetes. So there was somebody who implemented Kubernetes in COBOL, which was pretty funny. All right, now, any other questions? No? Okay, well, if there's no other questions, then we will go ahead and close out, and we'll go ahead and send you an email with more information, and I hope that you go ahead and sign up for part 2. We'll get you that information as well. All right. Thank you all very much. I want to thank everyone who is listening live, everyone who is listening on demand, and also thanks to Jasmeet for setting this up in the background. All right. Thank you all very much.